Sound check, 1, 2, 3. Sound check, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning. Welcome to the Light Rail Transit Subcommittee meeting of December the 11th, 2023. My name is Maureen Wilson. I am your chair. I would like to call the meeting to order. A reminder to please turn your electronic devices to a function where I cannot hear them. Thank you. Quorum is present. Joining me in the chamber today is Councillor Craig Kazar, Councillor JP Danko. Also are joining me online from council is Mayor Horvath and Councillor Cameron Kretsch. Our community delegates today, or members, are Member Dunnett from the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, Member Andrus from the Hamilton Community Benefit Network, and Member Diplock from the West End Home Builders Association, along with her colleague Anthony. Thank you. And I think that is all, and I know we have some guests, and we will introduce them at the appropriate time. Elsie McIntosh, any changes to today's agenda?
Yes, Chair Wilson. Presentation was added to the agenda, the report respecting getting Hamilton's LRT on the right track.
Okay. It's moved by Councillor Kazard, seconded by Councillor Danko to approve the agenda as amended. Any discussion? Seeing none. Thank you. The vote is up. Thumbs up from Mayor Horvath. Thumbs up from Councillor Kazar. Faites attention, s'il vous plaît. Carried 5-0. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Are there any this morning? Seeing none. Approval of the minutes of September the 25th. Moved by Councillor Kretsch, seconded by Councillor Kazar, please. Any discussion on those minutes? Seeing none. The vote is up. Thank you. That carries 5-0. 5.1, correspondence from Rosa Baraldo respecting LRT is not needed. A mover and a seconder. Councillor Kazar, seconded by Mayor Horvath. Electronic vote, please.
Councillor Kretsch, are you able to vote? Thank you.
Thank you. That carries 5-0. We're on to presentations. 8.1, lessons learned from Waterloo's light rail transit system. I'm going to call Mr. Mike Murray down, but before or while I do that, I would just like to give an introduction, and then I'll look to the bench for any additional comment or information. Delegate Mike Murray is a senior executive with extensive public, private, and not-for-profit sector work. Over his career, Mike has led the development and delivery of large-scale infrastructure projects and has focused on helping to create inclusive, thriving, and sustainable communities. Mike served as the CEO of the Regional Municipality of Waterloo for 16 years. And as CAO, he provided executive leadership to all aspects of that region's $1 billion light rail transit project, from concept through to completion over a period of 15 years. Throughout his career, Mike has fostered collaborative working relationships with diverse stakeholder groups. He was a founding member of the Waterloo Region Immigrant Employment Network, Waterloo Region Tourism Marketing Corporation, and the Creative Enterprise Initiative. Mike also served on the Central Ontario Smart Growth Panel and on the boards of numerous industry associations and not-for-profit organizations, including the Kitchener and Waterloo Community Foundation, Canada's Technology Triangle, Inc., the Canadian Urban Institute, and the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony. In his current consulting role, Mike has provided facilitation services for the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing regarding a complex wastewater servicing issue in the GTA, conducted program review for the District of Muskoka, provided facilitation and project management services for many multiple stakeholder projects in Waterloo, and he's currently providing strategic advice to the City of Hamilton regarding the Hamilton Light Rail project. Mike has a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from McMaster and a master's degree in civil environmental engineering from the University of Toronto, clearly an underperformer. We are so very fortunate to have Mike here with us today. He wanted me to underscore that he is no longer with the region as he's retired after a very long service in public service, and we thank him for that service and very pleased to see him here. I will, before you get going, turn to the bench to see if GM Thorne would like to add anything.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Just to note, as you said in the introduction, Mr. Murray's been retained as an advisor to the city really for about 2 years now, right through to providing some advice at the time we were in discussions with Metrolinx around the MOU, and he continues to provide that advice to us right up to today, and it's been very helpful to have him there as a resource to the team. And then just to let committee know, so we had spoken at the last meeting about having sort of a series of 3 reports coming forward, leading up to the 3rd report, which is the one where you'd be asked to make a decision in terms of the city's preferred position on the operations of the LRT. So that report will be coming to you in January. So that's when you'll have in front of you staff's analysis and staff's recommendation, and that's when we'll be seeking direction from you in terms of the city's position on operations. So prior to that, at the last meeting, it was asked that Mr. Murray come forward and provide some perspective from his past work in Waterloo. So that's what's in front of you today.
Excellent, thank you. One more procedural note, I'm sorry. Do I have to ask for an extension, or is this Elsie McIntosh?
No, Chair Wilson, this is a presentation.
Excellent, thank you. Again, Mr. Murray, thank you for being here.
Great. Well, Chair Wilson and members of the committee, thank you so much for the invitation to come. And thanks for the kind introduction. I provided the bio, but I usually expect, there's 1 or 2 sentences, so I didn't expect the whole thing. But, one point of note in there that you probably got lost towards the end is, I spent more than 4 years at McMaster to get my engineering degree. So fond memories of Hamilton, and I've watched the transformation of the community over the years. So I've been, really pleased and excited to be part of this project for the last little while. So as Chair Wilson said in the intro, I'm the former Chief Administrative Officer with the Region of Waterloo. So I no longer speak on behalf of the region. I am, in pretty regular contact with some of my former colleagues there. So things I'm going to talk about in terms of lessons learned, I think probably most of them would agree with. The other thing you'll find as I go through my presentation is I kind of lapse back and forth between talking about the Region of Waterloo, my former employer, and we, because I spent 28 years with the region. So if I lapse into we, it's because of 28 years of experience there, although I no longer work with the region. So I was asked to talk about lessons learned. What I'm going to do is just start off with just a quick overview of Waterloo Region's ION LRT. It was branded ION, that's sort of the name. So I'll talk about ION, LRT, just to give you a context, and I'll compare and contrast it with what's proposed for Hamilton. And what you'll see is a lot of similarities between what happened in what was built in Waterloo and what's planned to be built here in Hamilton. I'll talk a bit about the procurement and implementation approach, just to give you a little bit of context, because I know that that's one of the issues that this subcommittee and council is dealing with. And then I will talk about lessons learned during different phases of the project. And when I talk about lessons learned, as I went through putting together this presentation, I would say the lessons learned are kind of 2 types. There's lessons learned that are, things that we did that in hindsight worked pretty well, and we would do again. So I'd say those are kind of positive lessons learned. There's also lessons learned about things that, if we were going to do it again, we'd do some things differently. Which I guess would be the classic sort of lessons learned. So the projects. So Waterloo compared to Hamilton. So I'll go pretty quickly. Waterloo, we built 19 kilometers of LRT through dense urban areas. 19 station stops, 15 vehicles. Bombardier provided the vehicles, which would be a subject of a whole other presentation because that was, frankly, one of the most challenging parts of the project. The project capital cost was $868 million, probably approaching $900 million, and that was split between the region of Waterloo, took on more than a third, province and federal government each a little bit less than a third. And this is, I think, a very key difference. So the region owns it, built it with cost-sharing contributions from the federal and provincial governments. And it was implemented through a design, build, finance, operate, maintain implementation and procurement approach. I'm going to talk more about why we did it that way and some of the implications of that. So that's what we did in the region of Waterloo. The other complication in Waterloo region, any of you who are familiar with it, it's a two-tier municipal system. So the regional level was responsible for transit, responsible for building LRT, but we had to deal with local municipalities, Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge, which complicated things, which would be another whole story. So in Hamilton, you'll see some real similarities. A little bit shorter, but through dense, built-up urban areas. Similar number of stops. LRVs, I think Metrolinx is still trying to decide. $3.4 billion. This is a big difference. As I understand it, all of the capital funding is coming from federal and provincial government. And Metrolinx, the province/Metrolinx, will own it. The city, again, if I understand it right, will be responsible for paying all of the net operating and non-life cycle maintenance costs. So there's a key difference. You have the Metrolinx complication as the owner of the infrastructure, the deliverer of the infrastructure, but it's going right through the heart of your city, and you're going to be responsible for the net O&M costs. Metrolinx, I think, is still working out implementation, but if I understand it right, they're talking about a two-phase approach. Phase one would deal with most of the underground works, get all that cleared up through an alliance model, and then phase two would be building the LRT system, and I think they're still trying to sort out the approach to that. Design, build, question mark around what role the city plays in operations, and I think some question about maintenance. So you'll see some real similarities, a few key differences, and I think the Metrolinx ownership is a key difference. So in Waterloo, as we planned our LRT, we always talked about we have two parallel goals for this system. One is moving people, so the transportation goal, and the other was shaping the community, building the community, encouraging intensification. So the land use planning, city building dimension. And these were two parallel goals. The details that you see on this slide, so back, I'm going to say 2011, 12, 13, the region decided, here's our goals. We need to monitor change in our central transit corridor. We need to monitor progress. And they've worked early on with the University of Waterloo. I'm not sure if they're still doing that, but they publish an annual monitoring change in the Central Transit Corridor report. And the most recent report just came out. It's on the region's council agenda website. And so they've got updated metrics on all of these measures, right? So you see some metrics around the transportation dimension, even more metrics around building community. Focus on intensification, cultural vibrancy. And, we worked with the university to say, how do you actually measure building community? And so they came up with metrics like, how many restaurants do you have in the Central Transit Corridor? Are you preserving heritage resources? What kind of building activity is going on? Housing mix, housing affordability. So anyway, so they've been pretty diligent about monitoring change in the Central Transit Corridor. It was completely disrupted by COVID, and some of the metrics are skewed by COVID, but I think they're getting back on track, pardon the pun, at this point. So, in terms of roles and responsibilities in Waterloo, the region, as I said, is the owner of the infrastructure. We funded it with federal and provincial contributions, so we own the infrastructure. The region procured and owns the LRT vehicles. The region sets the schedule, sets the fares. The region monitors overall system performance. And the region provides integrated customer service. They've got a 24/7 call center that deals with conventional transit and LRT, has transit route finding apps that integrate conventional transit and LRT. So the whole idea was we provided a seamless customer service experience. And so then, we implemented it through a design, build, finance, operate, maintain. The private partner, a consortium called GrandLink, they designed and constructed the LRT system to our output specifications. They operate the ION, and they have at least a 10-year operating agreement with optional 5-year renewals to a total of 30 years. They're responsible for maintaining the vehicles, the facilities, the system for that whole 30-year period. I actually took this photo not too long ago, and I just wanted to point out a couple of things. So, there's often talk in a DBFOM, those kinds of projects, that it's privatization, that the public sector loses control. This is what you see when you board an ION vehicle. What do you see? Region of Waterloo, ION, I think maybe on the other side there's Grand River Transit. So the public's experience is this is part of the Region of Waterloo's transit system. So just wanted to point that out. So procurement and implementation, because the region was the owner and we were going to be responsible for building it, we did a lot of work in 2011, 2012, looking at implementation options. And so I promise you, I am not going to go through the pros and cons of all of these. This is work that I think Metrolinx continues to do and is seeking input from the city, particularly around the operations piece. But we looked at the whole range of implementation options from a conventional design bid build. That's how you would typically build a road or a big bus storage and maintenance facility or a big water treatment plant, through to design, build, finance, operate, maintain, which is what we landed on. And the next two slides just give you a little bit of rationale for why we landed where we landed. So these were some of our considerations at the time, with regional staff and working with our team of advisors, legal advisors, finance advisors, technical advisors. So these were some of the things that we heard from our advisors at the time and that we learned from talking to other people who had implemented LRTs at the time. And there's actually more now to learn from than there were 10, 15 years ago. So some of the key messages was integrating the design and construction is important. It avoids the conflict, the inevitable conflict between designers and builders, which I would wager you get on most of your big construction projects. It just seems inevitable. Integrating construction with operations is important because that avoids conflict between the builder and the operator. And conflict just plays out as finger pointing. When something doesn't work, the operator says, well, it wasn't built right. And the builder says, no, you're not operating it properly. Integrating operations and maintenance is important because, again, you potentially get conflict between operators and maintainers. I would wager that even happens right now in your bus system. The bus operators complain about the mechanics complain about the operators. Unless HSR is very different than Grand River Transit. Integrating design with operations and maintenance is important because it gives the designer incentive to consider long-term life cycle costs. They don't cheap out because they're going to have to operate and maintain it for 30 years. And then including finance, which is not as relevant for the city, it's more a Metrolinx issue, but it provided financial leverage to ensure proper performance, penalties and bonuses. So, So why did the region of Waterloo choose DBFOM? And, I'm just giving this as, these were the region's considerations in 2011 and 2012 when we actually made that decision. So that was, more than 10 years ago. And there's been a lot of experience gained on LRT projects in the province, across the country, and around the world. However, this is what the region kind of concluded, that this procurement and delivery approach would be lowest cost over the term. For sure, we concluded the private sector had more experience than the region of Waterloo in designing, constructing, operating, and maintaining an LRT system, because frankly, the region of Waterloo had zero. We had never, engaged in an LRT project before. Customer service. We felt it was really important that the region retain customer service. We wanted to provide a seamless customer experience. People could get on and off Grand River Transit buses, on and off ION seamlessly. And you'll see in lessons learned, I think the region has really recognized that. Risk, the theory was allocating risk to the party best able to manage it. So some risks, public sector is better able to manage, some risks private sector is better able to manage, and so it was basically a risk allocation exercise. The coordination risk, so I talked in the previous slide about finger pointing. Our conclusion was the fewer interfaces we had between different parties, the more clear the accountability was going to be, and the less finger pointing was likely to happen. And you'll see when I get into lessons learned, that has actually proved to be the case. Flexibility with that sort of 10-year period allowed for early termination of the operating agreement if it was necessary, if it was desired by the region. Okay, so that's kind of all context. Now we're into lessons learned. And what I'll say is, in my lessons learned, I've tried to focus mostly on the things that I hope are relevant to City Council, to this subcommittee. There are other lessons learned that might be more relevant to Metrolinx as the owner. There's some really detailed in the weeds lessons learned that I have periodic conversations with city staff about. But what I've tried to focus on, hopefully, are lessons learned that are interesting and relevant for City Council. So here we go. Lessons learned during the planning and design phase. So be willing to invest in upgrades and enhancements to improve the urban realm. If one of your goals is city building, and I wager it is, you're not just trying to build a transportation system, you're trying to build a city, a vibrant urban area. You may need additional capital funding for call it enhancements, call it betterments. I imagine what you may get from Metrolinx is a functional LRT system. Like that's typically Metrolinx's focus, is building transportation systems. If your focus is building an attractive, vibrant urban area, it may need additional funding for landscaping, streetscaping, urban amenities. And in hindsight, the region could have done more of that. I was leading this. We had a project budget. We were desperately trying to stay within the project budget. And every now and again, I would say we made short-sighted decisions to not invest in enhancements and betterments, just to stick within the capital budget. And, in hindsight, they were short-sighted. And we should, probably should have said, well, you know what? We need some increase to the capital budget to really make this an outstanding project. So there's a lesson learned. Pay attention to design issues that might affect city infrastructure. There'll be lots of interface between city infrastructure, city roads, water mains, sewers, storm sewers, traffic signals, summer and winter maintenance, lots of points of intersection between that and the LRT project. So there may be LRT design issues that affect city infrastructure interests, and this may be, as much a point to city staff is you just need to constantly pay attention to that. How is this all going to work together? And especially because the owner of the LRT is not the City of Hamilton. So you just have to think that through. I think I just want to make sure. Here we go. Okay. So more lessons learned during the planning design phase. Identifying those municipal needs as early as possible. So as you work through the design documents, depending on what the nature of the procurement approach is, the municipal needs will need to get identified. And my encouragement is do that as early as possible and do it as completely as possible and in as much detail as possible. Now, unless you're doing a design bid build, there will be a limit on what level of detail you can specify, but providing clarity, like the city providing to Metrolinx, clarity about what you need, providing to the designer and builder clarity about the city needs will be really important. And you'll see in the next slide why it's important. I'm just going to skip to the second two bullets on this slide. It's really important to identify all those needs early, because as the project proceeds into design, once design's partly done, it gets more and more challenging to make changes, to say, oh, well, we forgot about this water main, now we need to upgrade that water main. It's going to get complicated. And once you're into construction, it's going to get really complicated and maybe impossible. And we had a couple of those where, we got into construction, there were a couple of things we'd missed. We said to the contractor, well, we want to make a change. Can you give us a quote? And on a couple of things, contractor said, actually, no, we won't give you a quote because we are not prepared to do that work because it's going to jeopardize our whole project schedule. And so then there were a couple of things we had to fix after the fact. So this is just a heads up that, the sooner you can identify city needs, the better. It's going to save some money, for sure going to save aggravation. The other thing, again, because the city's on the hook for the operating and maintenance costs, paying attention to design issues that might affect O&M costs. There's always trade-offs between, spending a little bit more upfront on higher quality materials or more durable design that reduce your ongoing operating and maintenance costs. But again, since different parties are responsible for this, this is something that I think for sure city staff need to, pay attention to as the project proceeds. Okay, so now, let me just make sure, yeah. So now we're out of design and into construction. So I put up a couple of photos. So intellectually, in the region, we knew construction was going to be disruptive, intellectually. It was more disruptive than we anticipated. This just gives you some of, visuals of some of the construction, especially in, built-up urban areas. So, this is something that city staff need to be prepared for, city councilors need to be prepared for. There's things you can do to mitigate the impact, to work with residents, work with businesses, but you just need to be prepared that this is going to be challenging. I understand that Metrolinx is proposing a two-phase approach where they'll deal with all the underground utilities in phase one and then come back and build the LRT in a subsequent phase. That may help. You look at a lot of these, really, really disruptive work is the underground work. You see the excavation going on in these photos, water main replacement. So, getting that out of the way as efficiently as possible, I think will help. So, so some of the lessons learned during construction, it was a challenging period in Waterloo. If you talk to people who live along the corridor, they will say that for sure. Communications is critical. We did a lot. Hindsight, we could have done more, should have done more. One of the things that we did do, I think, not right at the beginning, but a little ways along, was we had, I think we called them ambassadors. We had 2 or 3 people on our communications team that went out and made personal contact with all of the property owners, so businesses, residents along the route, and cell phone numbers. It's like 24/7, if you have a problem, call me. And they were empowered to, work with the contractor, resolve issues, and try to resolve them quickly to avoid, the calls to, the regional chair, calls to city councilors, calls to, the CAO's office. We tried to resolve that as quickly as we could at the front line. So communication is critical. Working closely with resident and business groups, also critical. And doing that proactively, saying, okay, here's the plan, here's the schedule, how can we help you? The region provided some small funding to some of our business improvement areas to do bits of marketing campaign. This area is open for business, and here's how you can access the businesses in this area during construction. So those things helped mitigate the impacts. They didn't, avoid it entirely. Okay, so now we've been through planning, design, construction, now into operations and maintenance. So the ION system started operation June 21st of 2019. They etched in my mind because we said we will go into operations in the spring of 2019. And spring ran until June 21st. So we made it by like a couple hours. So lessons learned, operations and maintenance. I talked recently to some of the region staff who are responsible for administering the contract. Said, how's it going? And this was the headline they gave me. They said, overall, this is working really well. It is a highly reliable system. 96% of all trips completed on time. So that's one of the metrics about is this working or not, it is a highly reliable system. The operations and maintenance approach has been efficient and it has been effective. Some of the things I've heard is the contractor is able to redeploy operations and maintenance staff as needed. So sometimes, a mechanic may go out and if there's a LRV broken down on the tracks, it may not need to be an operator that brings that back. It may be a mechanic. Mechanics can do some of the testing. So I think they move staff around because they're responsible for both operations and maintenance. The contractor is an international company that operates LRT systems all over the world. And so they have in-house expertise on just about any issue that could arise during operations and maintenance. And so they're able in-house to bring in their specialized staff as needed to deal with specific issues. And there is an industry shortage of skilled people. So finding these folks who have this, deep expertise on operating and maintaining LRT systems is a challenge. The other thing that I've heard from the Waterloo folks is, they have been successful at integrating design, construction, operations, and maintenance. If there's an issue, GrandLink fixes it. And what our staff don't get is finger pointing. They don't get the operator saying, wow, the system wasn't designed properly or wasn't built properly or poorly maintained. No, it's on them. And they have fully accepted that responsibility. So, in terms of risk transfer, that has been relatively effective. A few other lessons learned on operations and maintenance. What the folks say is you need a carrot and a stick. So you need to work with the contractor, the operations and maintenance contractor. You have to build a relationship. That took a while, went through some ups and downs, a bit of a roller coaster, but what I hear from the Waterloo folks is they have a very good working relationship between the region staff and the contractor staff. But they have a pretty good contract. And so both parties try to work things out collaboratively, but they both know that if we can't work out issues collaboratively, they know what the terms and conditions in the contract are. So that's, the fallback position. If we can't, work something out amicably, we go back to the contract. There is a need to have skilled people on the owner's staff to monitor and manage the contract. These contracts are complicated. They're technically complicated, financially complicated, administratively complicated. So you need really, really good people to manage this. Here's a couple of interesting lessons learned. And these are in the realm of things that in hindsight we would have done slightly differently. So there's all sorts of terms and conditions in the contract around mostly penalties for poor performance. The contract could have been calibrated a little bit better to incent the desired performance from the contractor. So, for example, the last couple winters, the contractor has missed some trips because the system ices up during freezing rain conditions. there's things that they could have done both during the design and construction and during operations to prevent that, technical things. So, but I think they've done the math and said, well, okay, the penalty for missing a few trips is X, the cost to de-ice the system is Y, we're going to miss a few trips. Well, that affects customer service. And so in hindsight, calibrating the contract differently and better to really focus on customer service and things that are within the contractor's control that impact customer service should attract greater penalties. And the other thing is, I think the penalties right now for missed service are the same, regardless of whether it's, a Sunday morning or 4 o'clock on a weekday afternoon. Well, the customer impact is different. So that I would say, this calibrating the contract is an important lesson learned. Making sure the contract provides enough flexibility to adjust service levels as needed to meet demand. If you follow the press from Waterloo Region, Regional Council recently went through that. There is flexibility in the contract that allows them to increase service frequency, and I think they've actually just decided to do that because demand is increasing dramatically, which is a great problem to have, but you need to make sure that the contract provides enough flexibility to do that. Another thing that they've learned over time is inevitably there are collisions with LRT vehicles on the tracks. Again, if you follow Waterloo media, there was some pictures on social media this weekend. A transport truck turned right into a light rail vehicle. So then it disrupts service. So having good protocols with police, fire, the contractor, the city to try to keep LRT service moving to minimize the impact on customer service. That's, as you get closer to operation, that's something that's really important to think about. Bus bridging is a complicated issue. When LRT service is disrupted, then a bus bridge is put in place, which is basically you have buses and they bypass wherever the service disruption is. In Waterloo's case, the region pays the entire cost of bus bridging. And so I've heard people say, oh, well, that cost maybe should be put on the contractor. And in talking to the Waterloo folks, I said, you know what, it's actually not that simple. The bus bridge provides system-wide benefit because now you have more spare buses and a bigger spare board, and they're using that spare board to provide better bus service, actually more reliable bus service. And the other thing is, I said, you want to avoid any perverse incentives for a contractor to delay starting a bus bridge. Like you want to focus on, look, if the service is disrupted, get a bus bridge in place ASAP. So that was kind of interesting lesson learned. And including life cycle maintenance in the contract, which I think Metrolinx intends to do, I think is really wise because unless you do that and bake it right into the contract, there is potential for asset deterioration over time. And, I would wager the city, like most municipalities, has a bit of an infrastructure deficit because of deferred asset maintenance. Okay, so those are some of the, I would say, technical lessons learned. Now we're into like the city building lessons learned. So this is on the positive side. In Waterloo, LRT has been transformational. If you go and drive around downtown Kitchener, uptown Waterloo, truly it's a renaissance. So here's just some numbers. I think most of these come out of, I told you that most recent, I see this got people's attention, the most recent monitoring report, so it's called Monitoring Change in the Central Transit Corridor. It went to the Region's Planning and Works Committee last Tuesday. So you can go online, you can find the whole thing. But these are just some numbers from it. So $4.5 billion in building permits for new construction. Now, I want to say this is, the region announced in 2011 we're going ahead with LRT. And so at that point, we started monitoring some of these things because what we found is just the fact of announcing this is going to happen, we had funding in place, it triggered construction. in anticipation of the infrastructure being in place. So these numbers are from 2011 to 2022 within, it's a corridor. I think it's 400 meters on either side of the tracks and around the stations. So $4.5 billion in building permits for new construction, over $800 million per year increase in assessed value of properties, 30,000 more people living in the Central Transit Corridor. So one of our goals was intensification. It is happening. How do you measure, vibrant urban community? 140 additional restaurants in the Central Transit Corridor. That's net, like some closed, some open, that's net. And more people attending events in the Central Transit Corridor. So these are, I think, ways to measure, is it having an impact on city building? Lessons learned in urban design, if one of your goals, and I believe it is city building, then integrating the planning and urban design with the LRT project is critical. What I show down here, this is just a figure from a document that the region worked on with the local municipalities. We called it Community Building Strategy. And it was to try to look at what potential for development and redevelopment existed around each of the stations, and recognizing they were all different. Some of them had mature neighborhoods, some of them had a little more open space, some of them had brownfields. So we looked station area by station area and said, what's the potential for development and redevelopment, and how do we incent the kind of development that we want? So integrating that planning and urban design with the LRT is really important. Aligning land use planning policies with the infrastructure is really important. I think you're turning your minds to that. Focusing on urban design, design guidelines, working with Metrolinx on the stationary designs, landscaping, streetscaping. Again, in hindsight, we could have and should have done more on that. And as I said at the very beginning, there were a couple areas where, trying to live within our capital budget, we did some bare bones things. At one point, the LRT goes through a park in Uptown Waterloo. I think we put up a chain link fence. Well, you know what? We should have done better. Like, you can do really attractive fencing, but we were really tight on budget. But so that's really a lesson learned is finding ways to do this. The other thing, I think there's some potential for financial incentives to incent or encourage private sector transit supportive development. There's lots of ways to do that. Community impacts. So this sometimes gets lost is as part of this project, you're going to replace a ton of aging infrastructure. You're going to replace kilometers of old water mains, kilometers of old sewers, kilometers of old roads. In our case, what you see here, sort of middle of the picture, is a road rail grade separation. That was brand new as part of this project. There's a lot of other benefits to the community in terms of just improving the overall quality of your urban infrastructure. Ridership. So one of our goals was moving people. So it's working. It's working. We saw in the 3 months after we opened, so that was June of 2019, first 3 months, we saw a 13% increase in system-wide boardings on the whole system. And this was one of our goals, is we weren't just building an LRT. We were building an integrated transit system. We had express bus routes that connected with the LRT. We redid our whole route network around the same time as we opened the LRT. And said, this thing operates as an integrated system. And 33% increase in ridership in the CTC is Central Transit Corridor. So 20% system ridership increase from 2018 to 2023 to date. And, 2.5 years of that was COVID, right? So, and every transit system in the country was dramatically impacted. But September 2023, the region of Waterloo reported highest transit ridership ever, up 33% over September 2019, so when we started the LRT, and up 44% over September of 2022, which was still recovering from COVID. So you can see, in terms of moving people, it's working. I think it's my last slide. Affordable housing. So this for sure is in the realm of lessons learned, would have done some things differently. I would say back in 2011, 12, 13, when we were planning and designing and building this, affordable housing wasn't as high on the radar and the agenda as it is today. But nevertheless, we could have done some things differently. What we're seeing is significant intensification all along the LRT corridor. Even areas that are a little bit more suburban are seeing really interesting, intense developments around the station areas. And for sure in the core areas, lots of intensification. So a significant overall increase in housing supply in the built-up urban area. Dramatic. However, some of that I would call, in the realm of gentrification. So what you're seeing is, demolition of, 2- and 3-story older buildings, probably lower rent. So some of those being bought up, parcels assembled, demolished, and then, rental and condo towers getting built. So that is happening for sure. In hindsight, we probably could have been more proactive in terms of putting policies in place to require some of that development to be affordable. We had and could have had more financial incentives to encourage affordable development around LRT stations. And the region had precious little land that we owned along the corridor. The cities had a little bit more. But if you look at, regions, cities, province, feds, there probably is some government-owned land along the region's LRT corridor, and that government land could be repurposed for affordable housing. So that, in hindsight, region could have done more on that, and I know that that's a focus for the city, and I applaud you for that. So that's a whirlwind lessons learned. So hopefully some of that was interesting and relevant, and happy to try to answer any questions through the chair.
Thank you very much. The chair rules that it was all interesting and very relative.
All right.
So thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Welcome. We have our speakers list open. I'm going to recognize the first person on the speakers list is Councillor Danko, and then we'll move accordingly. Councillor Danko.
Thank you, Chair. And likewise, really appreciated the presentation and getting a perspective from the just amazing job that you've done in KW. Just a quick comment off the top. I mean, a number of us that have been advocating for LRT for many, many years have been consistently pointing to KW as the example to follow. So it's really nice to see that laid out in the lessons that you've learned. My question is just a couple comparisons to some of the models that, or examples that people commonly point to as, issues to, or examples to avoid. And the first one is obviously Ottawa in the operating model and some of the challenges that they're having. So I'm sure you've followed, Ottawa closely. Just wondering what your perspective is of how you've managed to avoid the situations that they're having in Ottawa with, I think, is the same procurement model.
So, yep, through the chair. Yes. So Ottawa, has had a lot of challenges. I don't claim to have, a lot of insight. So a couple of things. Their procurement and delivery model is slightly different. And so I think one of the fundamental differences in Ottawa, they had a design, build, finance, maintain. The city took on all of the operations. And I think part of the rationale for that is they had previously operated a railway. It was heavy rail, but they were operating a commuter train, the O train. So I don't know if that was some of what was behind their thinking about why the city took on the operations. But I do think that that has complicated their project because you have, this goes back to what I said, so you have finger pointing between the city as the operator and I'm going to call it the project company, the private consortium, who was responsible for designing, building, and maintaining it. And so I think there's been some finger pointing between the city as the operator and the private company as the designer, builder, and maintainer. And I know that there's been issues at the interface between operations and maintenance. You know, some of these derailments, for example, is a derailment, is it an operations issue, or is it a design issue, or a construction issue, or a maintenance issue? And these are technically intensely complicated, but trying to resolve it has involved additional parties. So I hope that helps. So I think that's one of the big differences. There's probably others.
No, I think that really helps me with perspective for a future discussion that we're definitely going to have as well. So I appreciate that. And my second question is the comparisons to obviously Metrolinx and Eglinton Crosstown in terms of cost and timeline. You know, budget for the KW LRT being under $1 billion is less than a third of what the current budget for the city of Hamilton's is in terms of capital. You delivered it pretty close to budget and timeline versus some of those Metrolinx projects that people point to and say, you know, look at that. That is a problem. So again, just comparison, what did you do differently than what you're seeing in Metrolinx, Eglinton Crosstown, and others?
So I'll make a couple, again, through the chair, I'll make a couple of comments. As much as I would love to say we were on time and on budget, okay, being really honest, we were about 2 years longer than we had anticipated. And I would lay almost all of that blame on Bombardier. And they were about 2 years late in providing the vehicles. And we were a little over, about 50 million over budget, which, you know, at the time as the chief administrative officer just about killed me. But in hindsight, given other LRT projects, it was not too bad. So part of it, I think, is just the scale of these projects and the complexity of these projects. Ours involved no tunneling. And this Eglinton Crosstown and Ottawa both have tunnels. And, you know, I just think tunneling intensely complicates these systems when you're doing that much extensive work underground. So that's a factor. You know, you think, so as much as we were working through historic built-up urban areas, the city of Toronto is probably an order of magnitude worse. You know, trying to tunnel under Yonge and Eglinton, like, honestly, I can't imagine the complexity there. So I think part of that, I'm going to give you another example, or another issue, which is similar to the Ottawa issue. So in Eglinton Crosstown, Metrolinx is the owner. They've engaged a private sector consortium to design, build, and maintain the LRT. TTC is the operator. So once again, you have an additional party in the mix. And speculating and reading the media, there's tension between the private consortium and TTC and Metrolinx. And some of that, I think, is aired out in court cases, actually. So there's another complication. You know, I'm not saying that's the only one, but I think it's a factor. So there's a couple of factors.
Thank you. My last question, Chair, if I still have time, is you spoke about the economic development, the impact that LRT has had in terms of city building and growth in Kitchener-Waterloo, and anybody that's actually been there, I think it's more than obvious the amazing impact, positive impact that it's had on the city. But the one statistic that you showed that really stood out for me is the fact that KW has seen a 20% increase in system ridership between 2018 and today. Just knowing our HSR transit stats, and as far as I'm aware, you're probably the only municipality that I'm aware of that's actually seen a growth in ridership across COVID. We're still trying to get up to our pre-COVID levels. You know, we're seeing riders come back, but it's a struggle. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe delve into that a little bit more, because it is an extraordinary statistic that I think really stands out among Canadian municipalities.
Again, through the chair, yeah, no, I appreciate the comment. You know, not working there now, but watching it with great interest. I was concerned when ridership, was decimated through COVID. I was just concerned for transit systems across the country. And to see this one come back so robustly is remarkable. So I think there's a couple of things going on. One is the intensification. So these things are all related. So the intensification along the corridor drives ridership. Right? You have more people living and working within a walking distance of the LRT, of really good transit service. So they're using it. And, again, if you've been in Kitchener and Waterloo, you see there's more and more development happening all the time. And that carried on through COVID. So there's more people. So that's, I think, part of it. Student ridership is a big part of it. And students, I think, have found having good access to the LRT has opened up housing options for them. And, so they're all struggling with affordable rents. And so I think part of what's happening is them spreading out a little bit along the LRT corridor and finding a little bit more affordable rent a little further away from campus. So it's hard to know. The Grand River Transit people, the Water Region people may have a little more deeper insight, but to me those would be two big factors: is intensification along the corridor and student ridership. And the transit system has universal transit pass with all the post-secondary institutions in Waterloo. So Conestoga College, Laurier, and Waterloo. And I'll say one last thing and I'll stop. It is system-wide ridership. And so the region has continued to invest in improved transit service right across the system. And I think that's really important, actually, is it's not either or. It's not, we'll put a whole bunch of money into LRT and disinvest in the bus system. Honestly, if you want to provide a better transit service, you need better bus service, express bus service, more frequency, and connecting to a really good LRT. So probably three factors in Waterloo. But thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time, Chair. It makes me that much more excited about the Re-envision campaign and all the work that we're doing to be ready for LRT in Hamilton. Thanks so much.
It'll be great.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just so folks know, I have I'm reading in front of me, Councillor Kassar, Kretsch, and Member Andrus. Councillor Kassar.
Thank you, Chair Wilson, and thank you very much for the presentation. I echo Councillor Danko's comments. In the next presentation, we're going to hear about our suggestion on land value capture. And you mentioned towards the end there, of course, the assessment value, and you mentioned wanting to do better on affordable housing, and inclusionary zoning is in the mix here in Hamilton. Didn't mention anything about land banking or anything else. I'm curious if you could comment on the topic of land value capture, any lessons learned there or advice that you would have for Hamilton and what we should be thinking about, through the chair.
Yes, yeah, through the chair. I'm probably a little out of my depth. The region did almost no land banking. We did a little bit. If you're familiar with Kitchener, we actually bought up a bunch of land at the corner of King and Victoria Street in downtown Kitchener to be the site of a future multimodal transit station, GO Train, LRT, intercity bus. So we purchased the land before the LRT route was announced. Yeah. So that was a very small example of land banking and trying to capture the value uplift, not one small area. Right. That was the only bit of that we did. And as I said, the region owned almost no land along the corridor. And the cities owned very little land. So I suppose the municipality, the region or the cities could have gone early on, bought land and watched it appreciate in value, and then either developed it for housing, affordable housing, or sold it and, taken the profits and used that for other public purposes. And I suppose, any public sector entities here in Hamilton would have the opportunity to do that. So I would say, for sure, the value of the land is going to appreciate. Oh, yeah. There's no question. So, if you're, if people are wondering, like, is there a good business case? There probably is. Depending on the parcels, you may be late in the game. Like, this has been contemplated for a while, and I imagine that there's probably some savvy developers out there who've bought up, some prime parcels along the corridor. So I know that may not be of much help, but I think it's worth doing, and I think the public sector for sure has a role to play in finding any ways to facilitate and incent more affordable housing on the corridor.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I may have other questions, but I'll allow the opportunity for others to ask. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. We have Councillor Crutch, please.
Thanks, and I'm behind you. I appreciate the presentation. I lived in Kitchener-Waterloo. Big section of my family lives there, extended family, and so I know the area well. I actually lived there just before LRT construction started, and have visited several times since to kind of see what the progress has been. And you're right, it's been absolutely transformational. It's changed, frankly, the whole of downtown Kitchener for sure, in terms of the way it used to function and exist. And that's where my question kind of leads, is one of the things about Hamilton is that we have been seen, although that's been changing over recent years, to be a place that's affordable for people to live. It's an inclusive community. There's a lot of diversity downtown. I'm just as enthusiastic as other people are about this project, but my concern remains about the affordable housing warning you gave us. And I wonder if you could speak to that in more detail, frankly, because I'm worried about this making our downtown much more exclusive than inclusive, pushing out people who currently live here, and I would say east to where, with the unaffordability across our province right now. And how can we make sure that this is the most inclusive project possible? What do you think we can do now to ensure that that happens?
Yeah, again, through the chair. I appreciate the question. So I would say a couple of things. I'd have to go back and look in more depth at, I referred a couple times to this monitoring change in the Central Transit Corridor work that the region has been doing. And they have some metrics around housing affordability, rent affordability, and it's properties are still affordable. Like relative to the rest of the community, they're still relatively affordable. The other thing that has been really good is a dramatic increase in housing stock. So, right, which I think is one of the goals is you have more housing, and inherently, I think with a little bit of intention, you'll have more affordable housing, like just the rise in, it's a supply demand, so rise in supply helps. So those are a couple of things. So there's more housing stock for sure in the core, so that helps. I believe that I'm a little out of my depth, but there are public policy things that can be done to facilitate or encourage affordable housing development. So inclusionary zoning is one. Incentives, another one. So I think there's a number of things that the city could do that would either require or incent or facilitate affordable housing development along the corridor as it intensifies, because it's going to change, and I think you're far enough ahead of the game that you've got opportunities to influence what that change looks like. And it sounds to me like you're thinking intensely about it. I know your staff are thinking intensely about it. So I think there's enough tools, policy tools, financial tools, regulatory tools that can be used that I think will make a dramatic difference.
Councillor Crutch.
Thanks. I have two more questions. One is a little bit more pointedly on this specific topic about displacement. So a lot of what we're going to see is, when you talked about there were 2- and 3-story buildings that were perhaps deeply affordable or more affordable than they are now, that have gone the wayside as they were destroyed, and up went more density. And I'm all for more density downtown, because the only way that small businesses are going to thrive, the only way the downtown's going to thrive, is by having people who live in the downtown. So that's the point I understand. It's a given. But when we displace people, and they have nowhere to go for a period of time while this construction happens, what do you think we can do? I'm not looking at a policy. I'm saying to you, how important do we think it is to try and find a place for people to come back to? So everybody reaps the benefits, right? We're not just saying, hey, you can't be here anymore. We're going to reconstruct this building and you come back. My goal is, how does everyone who lives downtown now benefit from this development, not just sort of future imaginary people, but the folks who've lived here all their lives. And so I know you're not speaking to policy, but what did you witness in terms of displacement as this went on?
Yeah, again, through the chair, it's hard to know. It's hard to know at that sort of granular level. Like, was this person who was living in this 2 or 3 story older apartment, are they still living in the core or not? Honestly, I wouldn't be able to answer that. What I do know is one of the things that the region had, and I don't know if the city has, probably, was portable rent supplements, right, for, to assist people with affordable rent. And then they could, it traveled with the person, right? It wasn't applied to a specific landlord. Many of those people on portable rent supplements, and this is one of the metrics in that monitoring change, there's a lot of portable rent supplement people living in the core. So to me, that's a good measure that there's still housing that is affordable for people to use their portable rent supplement and still live in the core, which is apparently where they want to be.
Thanks. I appreciate that honesty, because I think it's something we have to track carefully and think about carefully, knowing what others have done. This is something we can do. We can find out where people are and if they're able to come back. And we do have some provisions in our downtown secondary plan that allow us to contemplate this. So hopefully we'll be exercising them. My last question is about business in the core. I was at an earlier LRT talk here in downtown from someone who'd helped with LRT, and if I recall correctly, it was St. Louis. And one of the big warnings he gave us is a warning that you gave us, and a warning I think we're on the path of with regard to ambassadors. So we've already got ambassador staff. Those ambassadors have already been making contact along the corridor for years. But the impacts I saw in Kitchener-Waterloo and then in London when they redid their downtown, not for LRT, but for other reasons, to small businesses were staggering. And I don't think we can do enough, frankly, to get ahead of that. But what are some key things you think we can do apart from communication to actually ensure that those businesses can survive, those that wish to stay, because some simply will look at this as an opportunity to say, I've been in business for 50 years, I'm going to retire. Some people are looking for that opportunity anyways. But those who want to remain in the core, what kind of programs can we build that you've seen have been successful elsewhere to encourage people to continue to shop at downtown businesses and to ensure that we don't basically decimate the entire downtown business core? I understand about the net thing, but I'm saying there are many legacy businesses that want to remain.
Yeah. Again, through the chair, yeah, it's a challenge. I think there are some things that we did in Waterloo that helped a bit. So as I said, we tried to work with business groups rather than individual businesses. So there were a number of business improvement areas in Uptown Waterloo and downtown Kitchener. So we tried to work closely with the BIAs, and truly closely, including sitting down with the heads of the BIAs and some of the businesses and saying, how can we help? What can we do that's really going to help? And so, there were some things around promotional campaigns. I think there was Uptown Bucks certificates that people gave out. And I think the region provided some funding. Again, we tried to avoid funding individual businesses, but we gave some funding to the BIAs to use in ways that they and their members thought would be helpful. And so, there were some things like that, it's not a lot, but it might be enough. And, I had those Uptown Bucks, and one of my favorite bookstores was in Uptown Waterloo. So, I made a point of going and buying all my books at Wordsworth Books. And you know what? Other people who felt strongly about supporting local business did the same. So those were, small things, but I think it sent a message. I think it made a difference. working with the contractor to say, you have to maintain access to these businesses. And so, you know, where could people park? We did all kinds of stuff around directional signage. Like, here's how you get to these businesses. In some cases, it was, you know, back alleys, and they had back doors, and they're going to use the back doors. Other cases, it was maintaining sidewalk access and saying, you know, anyway, maintaining sidewalk access. So there's a bunch of small things. You know, I would say, like, honestly, if you talk to people in Kitchener-Waterloo, there were some businesses that closed, and but others have opened. And now I would say they're thriving. So.
Thank you.
If I have time, Chair.
Your
I want to
last
ask one-
question, please.
Thank you. Yep. My question is about accessibility. So one of the other things I noticed in London when they were reconstructing their downtown, and again in Kitchener-Waterloo, London to more of an extent, frankly, is they attempted to make the businesses accessible. And one of the ways they did that was by installing kind of these long plywood planks. And the long plywood planks worked to an extent, but they weren't the best for wheelchairs. They were better for pedestrians because they had a wobble to them, these kinds of things. Downtown Hamilton has one of the largest populations of seniors and other folk with disabilities in the province of Ontario. And their ability to get down around the downtown core is essential to their ability to, you know, not feel isolated in their apartments and those kinds of things. And we know there's a lot of discussions and studies about what that isolation leads to. My question to you is, what did the region of Waterloo consider when it came to accessibility? What can we do to make sure that downtown remains somewhat accessible to people who need to get around the core? You know our downtown a little bit, I imagine. We have these huge dividing lines of King and Main Street that keep people from being able to get around. Well, we're going to be taking one of those corridors out in Ward 2. So I wonder about your thoughts on that and what we can do to mitigate harm to people with disabilities during the process.
Yep. So again, through the chair, I'll try to be brief. So the region's focus on accessibility when we're building the LRT was on the street right-of-way and the LRT design itself, not so much access to individual businesses. Although if we were redoing a sidewalk, then it would include, you know, how do we make sure the access to businesses is accessible. But, you know, so accessible sidewalks, curb cuts, pavement markings, they're all pretty standard things. The other really big thing is really intentional. Our LRVs are low-floor LRVs, and the platforms and the door is flush. So that was very intentional, and the platforms are, you know, only slightly raised up. They all have ramps at either end. So we were trying to avoid creating any barriers to access, and in fact, trying to enhance accessibility for all in the design of the streets, the streetscape, and the LRT.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
your answers. Thank you, Councillor. Also behind you is Mayor Horvath.
Hi, good morning. You can hear me, correct?
Yes, Mayor
Excellent.
Horvath. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I don't want to go over what other folks have asked. I appreciate the questions thus far. But one of the things that you spoke about very, very briefly was stations and stops. And I'm just wondering, how many stations do you have and how many stops do you have?
So, yeah, you know, we use station stops interchangeably. We have 19 station stops. Yeah.
Okay, but
And I think Hamilton will have 17.
Are there actual stations or just really stops?
I wish I had some photos. So they all have a platform, a canopy, covered, heated. They're not enclosed, but yeah, so canopies, back wall, some side walls, ticket vending machines, electronic information boards, some aesthetic design. We had a sort of standard layout for each of the stations, and then we did a sort of an artistic thing with the contractor and with local residents on customizing the design at each of them. So it's in between a stop and a station. It's not enclosed, but it's for sure way more than a bus stop. If you drive along Eglinton in Toronto, that's kind of what they look like.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. The other question I have is more about community acceptance. So I recall considerable tension in Kitchener-Waterloo around the pros and cons, or the yays and nays, the fors and against, when it came to the prospect of building an LRT. I have some personal friends in politics that went through some of those discussions. And I guess my question would be, after the fact now, everything's said and done, all of those amazing indicators that you shared with us are quite positive. Is there still, are there still people who would argue against the LRT now that it's functioning and doing all of the things that were expected, that it was expected to do? So is there still negativity towards the LRT?
Through the chair, I would say very, very little, if any. And part of it is, you know, I haven't worked there for 3.5 years, so I'm not getting any of it. But I also think that, you know, the current chair, who I talk to periodically, current councillors are hearing very little. There might be the odd person. Okay, being really honest, one of the issues was we're taking lanes of traffic off our streets.
Oh, dear.
What's that? You know, so we're disrupting downtown traffic patterns. So there are still people who would say, you know, we have a little more traffic congestion in the core because of LRT. And I think the community, the leaders, the decision makers have said, we're okay with that. You know, it's not dramatically different. But so if there's any negativity, I would say it's probably around that and a bit of disruption. And, you know, every now and again, there were driveways and accesses that were disrupted. So, you know, there are, I think, a few properties that, you know, direct access to them became more difficult. And some people's, you know, commute takes a few minutes longer. So probably if there's negativity, it'd be around that. But otherwise, no, we don't hear much. And, you know, from a former chair, Ken Sealing, who I know you knew, one of the things that he would reflect on is this project went through, I think, 3 municipal elections. And in every case, all of the councillors who supported LRT were reelected every time. So there's a message there.
Yeah. There's a message there, absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. Those were my questions.
Thank you, Mayor Horvath. I'm now going over here to Member Andrus. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much
Fix my neck now.
for the presentation and for bringing your expertise to us of the experience in Kitchener-Waterloo. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to group them around the affordable housing, which you touched on, and thank you for giving us a heads up on that. Just as a note, that CTS report that you mentioned shows only 71 units of affordable housing constructed and a net loss in rent subsidy units in the Phase 1 area. Just because you did reference it, it is actually showing a decline in affordability in the core by the metrics that they do choose to measure. I'd also like to point out that very same report doesn't include any demographic information in terms of the types of people who live outside of income deciles. So it might be some lessons learned for this community or for this committee and how we might better monitor our project. So that's kind of my comments on affordability, and I appreciate you raising that as one of the key concerns in your presentation. What I did want to talk about is this capital investment and kind of the urban realm investments that you feel that were a missed opportunity in Waterloo, because we're kind of right at the cusp of being able to make those decisions in Hamilton and avoid them. So from your own experience, what were some of those misses that you really think that if, for example, because the full cost of the project is being borne by the province and the federal government. So we have an opportunity, maybe if budget allows, to kick in some extra funds for amenities. What would some of those amenities you would have liked to see in the project?
Well, I'll give you a couple of specific examples, but what I would imagine, again, through the chair, what I would imagine is your specifics here are probably different than our specific, because it really is site specific. Like, this is really granular, you know, what on this street or this little parkette, you know, that's adjacent to where the tracks are going to run, what could you do? So I think it's very granular. So I gave one example. You know, the region's LRT runs through, it's called Waterloo Park. It's an urban park, it's beautiful. You know, we put in a pretty basic fence along the LRT. It might have been one step up from chain link, but not much. So, you know, if we had really turned our minds to it, and if we'd had some flexibility in the capital budget, we probably could have done something, you know, really, really striking. You know, we could have done enhanced plantings or architectural fence, or, you know, engaged a landscape architect to reimagine, you know, this pedestrian walkway through Waterloo Park. So that would be like an example. There were probably some station areas where, you know, we had I'm going to say a reasonable station design, like a template, but it wasn't, I'm trying to find the right word. You know, it wasn't architecturally necessarily as attractive as it could be. And there are stations that we know we could have done some really interesting landscape architecture around the stations. Some of them had interesting topography. We could have redone that. So those are a few examples that I think, you know, in hindsight, we could have. Some of it, on some of those, we did say, well, we can't accommodate this within the current capital budget. We can come back and do this after. Well, you know, then you get into competing priorities. The city councilors will know that. You may get around to it after, but you may not. And there are some things that it's going to be way more cost effective to do at the same time as you're doing the system construction. And so that's kind of my encouragement to city council and city staff is, you know, try to identify those opportunities. There's probably going to be more than, I mean, there's always more opportunities than there is funding, but I think if the city found some small pot of money to do betterments and enhancements in urban realm, I think that would be probably money well spent, because I would wager, and this is not a criticism of Metrolinx, they're in the business of building transit systems. You're going to get a really functional transit system, but if you want to build a beautiful urban realm, probably the city is going to have to invest some money in it.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Member Andrus?
State. Oh, there it goes. Thank you. I appreciate you reinforcing that, and also mentioning the need for that local context and really looking at not just Hamilton, but maybe at the neighborhood levels and at the resident levels. So my next question is a little bit around the procurement model for Kitchener-Waterloo. And I'm not going to ask you to specify other models that you didn't work on or other projects across the province or North America, whether DBFOM or project delivery partnerships or any of the rest. I'm curious a little bit around when the tendering was going out and you decided on the design, build, finance, maintain, operate, and you had Grand Link. Was Grand Link the only proponent, or was they the only project co, or were there other project co's that bid it as well on the project?
Mm-hmm. Through the chair. We went through a two-stage procurement process. We went through a request for qualifications, RFQ. Mm-hmm. going to say we got 5, maybe. We shortlisted to 3, and then we went through a request for proposal stage with those 3 proponents. And we did get 3 responsive proposals from 3 proponents.
And
Went through
that process?
a very significant evaluation process to select Grand Link.
Yeah, so so that selection process I'm very curious around, because you ended up with Keolis, who is your transit operator, who you've told us is actually been quite excellent, but Transdev has been selected in other procurement projects in North America and specifically in Ontario, and has a less decent record, I would say, in terms of that. So I wondered, did you guys look right down at the individual transit provider subcontractors in those project delivery packages?
Yeah, so again, through the chair, so typically these consortia included a design firm, 1 or more contractors, constructors, and operations and maintenance firm, and some ancillary organizations. So our evaluation drilled into detail on each of the elements. We looked at their experience, their references, their corporate profile, and on and on. So we looked in quite a bit of detail at each element of the project consortium. And evaluated each element of the project consortium, and then rolled up the scores to say, okay, on balance, which team scores the highest.
Great. And then just the last thing, I know that another committee member alluded to it around the accommodation during construction, and kind of really drilling down to some of those challenges during construction. You showed the photographs of some of what we can expect here. Thinking of kind of the questions around the accessibility, how much was there in terms of what the region did to manage the lived experience of people navigating those areas during construction, and what were like complaints or challenges or things that you guys ran? Because obviously there's always going to be. And was there any challenges between you, the region, and the project co, and then various subcontractors who may be the people who were responsible for where the cladding went or where the construction equipment got parked? So,
yeah. Again, through the chair. Yeah, I think you have good insight into the dynamics of a complicated construction project. So I would say yes, there were all of those challenges that you mentioned. So you saw some of the photos.
Yeah.
Providing, accessibility to those buildings, residents, businesses was always challenging. Providing accessibility for people with mobility issues was even more challenging. Dealing with the contractor and their subcontractors was challenging. So I'd be, yes, there were all those challenges. I think having the ambassadors was helpful, because, like, truly, you got to choose the right people, but they were people, and so there were individuals with mobility issues who had their cell phone numbers and would phone them, say, I'm trying to get to the store and it's blocked off today. Can you help me? And then they would contact directly the contractor or the subcontractor and say, we need to fix this. So there were issues. There always will be issues. I think we try to avoid them as much as possible, and then when they arise, try to fix them as fast as possible. And so those are kind of the mantras that I think the city, Metrolinx, the contractor probably need to have is, try to plan and avoid problems, and then if problems arise, try to fix them ASAP.
Thank you. That's all my questions for now. I'm probably out of time.
Thank you, member. Just so you know, we have Councillor Nan, followed by member Dunnett, and then second time Councillor Kassar, and then ultimately the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to turn off my video as I'm having some audio connection issues and just want to streamline to be heard and to be able to hear.
You also sound like you've been inhaling helium, but...
Really fascinating. Hopefully my questions come out clearly enough. I'll go slow. Thank you so much for your in-depth sharing today. The lessons learned have been really reflective, and I'm just feeling very appreciative of having this opportunity. My question for you through the chair was around whether the entire corridor had existing BIAs or if you had chunks of your corridor that didn't have BIAs and how you coordinated with those. I think you referred to them as business groups, but where there are not any BIAs, how did you manage that?
Yes, through the chair, that's a really good question. So I know there was a Waterloo, Uptown Waterloo BIA and Downtown Kitchener BIA. That covered the majority of businesses. There may have been a handful that were outside of those BIAs, and I just can't recall. I honestly can't recall, and I don't know what, if anything, we did for businesses that were outside of the BIAs. But it is a challenge for municipalities dealing with individual businesses and providing, financial incentives to individual businesses. So that's a challenge. It's easier to do it with, the groups that represent them.
Thank you. And then in terms of, you've shared a lot of insight around affordable housing as well as urban realm enhancements that were opportunities potentially not scoped out or potentially missed in the region. How or did the region plan to maximize additional social service or other community assets along the corridor, anticipating some of the density, i.e. recreation, green space, community assets like libraries?
Yeah, again, through the chair. So you've highlighted an interesting issue that I've largely avoided so far, which is our interesting two-tier municipal system in Waterloo. So a number of the things you just mentioned, parks, recreation, libraries, are the responsibility of the local tier municipalities, so the City of Waterloo and the City of Kitchener. So the region has responsibility for, social services, affordable housing. And as I said, affordable housing wasn't as high on our list as it is now, and perhaps not as high on our radar as it should have been. We probably could have done more about that. I think the cities, part of that, I showed that community building slide. Part of that was, an effort with land use planners working with others to say, what amenities exist in proximity to each of the station areas? What amenities do we need? Where are we likely to see significant increase in population and density, and where are we not? And what do we need to accommodate that, support it, and all that? So I think that was one of the mechanisms for the region to work with local municipalities, was this community building strategy. And again, it needed to get pretty granular, like at a station by station, neighborhood by neighborhood level.
Okay, thank you. Those were my remaining questions. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Nan. Going over here now to Member Dunnett.
Through the chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. I had the privilege about this time last year to do a tour of the LRT run with Ian McLean, my counterpart up in, and Ian, I think if I was to choose the wording that he said the most, it was, that's new, that wasn't here, that's new, as we went along the corridor. So the growth was impressive. I know for our community, and I'll speak on behalf of the business community, but I think it probably ripples into our community as a whole. You said you started in 2011. I think we probably started our LRT conversations before that. So the on-again, off-again nature has kind of led to some continued stress and doubt in our community about if this project's going to happen. Can you just highlight any additional trust factors that you implemented to build those supports within the community?
Yeah, again, through the chair. So I would say a couple things. I talked about 2011 being a major milestone. 2011 was when Regional Council made a final decision to proceed with LRT. That was preceded by about 8 years of study and chasing funding, actually. So we started that in about the early 2000s, 2004. So it went through some, ups and downs. So I think once, you asked about trust factors. Once Regional Council made its decision to proceed, then again, because the region was the owner, like we had carriage of this project. And by 2011, we had funding commitment from the federal and provincial governments. So the funding was secured. The region put in place a multi-year long-term funding strategy that, had incremental annual tax rate increases to fund the region's share of LRT capital and operating maintenance. So a couple things that the community saw. They saw that annual tax increase that was going to pay for LRT. But what they also saw was proceeding expeditiously with all of the steps needed to put in place LRT. So in 2012, we went through this evaluation of procurement and delivery options, brought that to regional council. They made a decision, this is the path we're going down. Directly after that, we launched into the RFQ process and the RFP process. So what the community was seeing was, this is moving ahead. We've now picked a delivery model. We've now issued an RFQ. We've now issued an RFP. We've now awarded a contract, and we awarded the contract, I think, in 2014. And then directly after we awarded the contract, there's the groundbreaking. So from 2011 to 2014, like in 3 years, it was, the community saw a lot of progress. I was going to say action, but they didn't see a lot of action, but they saw a lot of progress. And then once we broke ground, they worked away on the operation, maintenance, and storage facility for a little while, and then in late 2014, early 2015, got into construction. So, between 2011 and 2015, sounds like a long time, but there was, probably 4 or 5 milestones along the way. So I think that increased the community's belief that, yeah, this is real, this is going to happen. And in there somewhere, there was a municipal election. And as I said, the election got fought on an LRT issue. And all of the councillors who had supported the LRT got reelected. So, I think that, again, sent a message to the community that the community is behind this. And the municipal government is serious and committed to this.
Thank you. And through the chair, I think you answered my next question, but I'll ask it. And if there's anything else you want to add, it was specifically that. How did you keep a sense of urgency in progressing the project forwards to create that communication? Because again, part of the reason I'm asking the question is I think there's a want for communication along the line and throughout the community of where we're going. And the lack of communication leads to an increased sense of.
Yeah. And through the chair, no, I think your question is the answer, which is you just need ongoing, consistent, regular communication. And, here, that communication needs to be coordinated between Metrolinx and the city. And, we communicated, here's the plan. We intend to issue the RFQ here. We intend to issue the RFP here. We intend to award the contract here. We intend to start construction here. And then we would have periodic progress reports. It's like, we're on track with that. This is sliding a bit. And then once we got into construction, we had periodic reports. As I said, the frustrating part for the whole community was Bombardier being 2 years late with delivering vehicles. And, that was just intensely frustrating because, people saw construction happening, and you saw some of the pictures, and then we finished construction. So there's the LRT built and nothing happening. So that period of time from when, basically the construction was more or less done until we started running trains up and down the track to test them, that was a challenging period.
Okay, thank you. And my last question through the chair, because Councillor Crush did a good job of asking my question about the sports for the downtown business community, is as you spoke to the need for the city building initiatives and that intensification has come naturally, were there accelerated programs and additional incentives put in place by the community to help support those builds and that, because I think and I think I probably have that as a twofold question, both from a business community perspective and from a housing perspective.
Yeah. So again, through the chair, one of the things that I have this recollection, I'm 99% sure it's right. Both the region and the local municipalities had core area development charge exemptions. So, does that make sense to you? So basically, we waived development charges for development in the core. So that, you do the math, that's a pretty significant incentive for building in the core area. that was probably the biggest one. I think the local cities may have had other smaller financial incentives around building enhancements and facade improvements and things like just aesthetic improvements to streetscaping in the core area.
Through the chair, thank you very much.
Welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you. Councillor Cassar, please.
Thank you again, Chair Wilson. Yeah, I had a question from a customer's point of view, and specifically harmonization of fares. Because I think the situation in the region, as you described, as owning the project is very different than we will have here in Hamilton. And just if you could speak to harmonization of fares across the system, and then, you know, if it comes to increases or decreases in incentive programs for users, and how that is operating, and maybe some feedback on that, please.
Yes, through the chair. So my recollection is that the city is going to be, I'm looking to Mr. Shake and Mr. Thorne, the city is responsible for setting the fares on the LRT and on HSR. So city has that responsibility for setting fares, and the city retains 100% of the fare revenue. So the city can control fares on buses and LRT. And I imagine that you will harmonize that completely. And in Waterloo, it's one fare. Like one fare, ride the system anywhere you want. I think they've put in place a 2-hour transfer policy. You can get on, get back on, get off, get back on. So all of that is within the city's control, is all of your fare policies. I'm sure it'll be one common fare media, you know, probably a smart card or tap your credit card or whatever. The city, I think, has the added opportunity of integrating fares with GO Transit, I think, through Presto. But the Region of Waterloo wasn't part of the Presto system. City's part of Presto,
yes.
right? Yeah, yeah. So there's an added opportunity is integration with Presto. Does that answer your question?
Okay, yeah, that helps and sets up some future questions. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
If I could hand over the chair to Councillor Danko. I don't see Councillor Nan on the screen. This has been...
I'm here, but I just don't have video access. I apologize.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Mr. Murray. This has been enormously just invaluable, and your candor and insight. We are very well served, I think. I do have a question. Issues of affordability and the environment, of course, it's sometimes unfair to peg those issues now to a project which is in its planning stages, at least at a decade or more behind in the past. But if you have any insight or lessons that you'd like to share in terms of green standards and the environmental component that could go along with transit-oriented development, any project application comment you'd like to make in that regard, through the chair.
Yep, through the chair. Yeah, so I think you make a good point. You know, when we were planning this, it was, 10 to 15 years ago. So for sure, affordable housing wasn't as high on the radar. And environmental issues maybe weren't as intense, but they were there. So I think I believe that the Waterloo project agreement does include incentives for the project, so Grand Link, to reduce energy use. So that's, one thing that can be done is provide incentives in the contract for encouraging the contractor to reduce energy use during the operations and maintenance phase. So that's one. And, again, I think there's lots of sort of policy tools and financial incentives that can be used to incent environmental enhancements in development. So, I think there's things that you can do in terms of your land use planning policies. There's things that you can do in terms of, financial incentives for green enhancements on development that, my encouragement overall is to try to, integrate those ideas and make sure that they're incorporated as you're building the LRT so that they don't become afterthoughts.
Thank you. I do have a question next, but I'd like to place it in context. And it certainly is, as everything, colored by some editorial and opinion. Hamilton, I coined the term across the lower city, is one of a sacrifice zone, in that when we made a shift to focusing first and foremost on vehicular movement, we gave away much of the public realm for that single factor and feature. And in so doing, have eliminated a lot of, there's a lot of hardscape, there's not a lot of public space, and you've alluded to it several times, and there have been some questions about, woulda, coulda, shoulda on the importance of urban design. And if you could offer any further insight into placing an actual economic value or a city building value on the uplift that comes from beauty, from green space, from design in city building intentionally, through the chair.
Yeah, again, through the chair, that's a really interesting question, really interesting point. So, I'll just reinforce what I said. Like, I think in Waterloo, there were missed opportunities to do enhancements to streetscaping and betterments. And, I think Hamilton has the opportunity to do more of that than the region did. Putting a value on it, that's hard. That's hard. There's probably people who smarter than me who could attempt that. What I would say is something that we actually talked about a lot, which is, all right, how do we create a city where businesses want to invest and people want to live? And so I would wager most cities have that goal. We did in Waterloo. I imagine that that's one of your goals in Hamilton. How do we create a city where businesses want to invest, people want to live? And so you think about what attracts businesses, what attracts people. There's a range of things. And I would say different factors are important to different people and to different businesses. But for sure, an attractive place to live with amenities that people want is important for a lot of people. So I would just leave it at that, and that if people can choose an environment like that over one that has less of that, intuitively, they're going to be attracted to a place that has amenities, has some green space, has some things that they need and want to do. Mm-hmm. But again, I would say it's individual, right? Different things appeal to different people at different stages in their lives, and so you may attract a certain demographic at one time and a different demographic at a different time.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure I'll have a conversation with the head of our Chamber of Commerce, in that there's nothing bad about attracting private enterprise. Indeed. And there's nothing bad about allowing for small business and employment. And there's nothing bad about creating an environment which enables them to compete and draw those that talent and retain that talent. And that comes from, in my opinion, valuing that public space.
Yep, and if I could, Madam Chair, just to add to that, so, again, one of the things we talk about that I imagine you talk about, which is these people and businesses are more mobile now. Many people and businesses are more mobile now than they've ever been. Mm-hmm. And work from home, even more mobile. So how do you create a place where people want to be here as opposed to all the other places they could be, right? And so that raises the bar even higher, I think, in terms of creating a really attractive urban environment and a really attractive environment for business to invest in, because people can be anywhere in the world. And, why Hamilton?
That's right, Rosabeth Cantor. Magnets, we've got to draw them here. Glue, we've got to make them stick. So thank you. No further questions, I believe. On behalf of Mayor Horvath and this entire subcommittee and staff who have been in attendance, thank you so much for sharing the wealth of knowledge and experience. Very much appreciate it.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I appreciate the invitation, and thanks for your patience with my sort of reflections. I appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you. I believe we need a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation. Moved by Councillor Kassar and seconded by Councillor Danko.
Councillor Nan? She was there. Oh, she said
Councillor Nan?
vote in favor, she's wrote.
Yep. Okay. That carries 6-0. Thank you. We are on to 8.2, which is entitled Applying a Climate Justice Lens to the Light Rail Transit Project. And I'm going to call upon community member Andrus, who I believe is going to be introducing our student members from City Lab. Thank you.
It's on? Oh, thank you. Sorry, man. So it's my pleasure. Come on down. Come on down. It's been my pleasure on behalf of HCBN to work with a City Lab cohort of students this year to explore climate justice and the Hamilton LRT project. So I will allow them, they've got a presentation to bring before you that they've spent the entire semester working on to prepare for the moment to present to you. So I invite you all to pay attention. I'll give the students an opportunity during their presentation to introduce themselves. But on behalf of HCBN, I really want to thank you all for your hard work and for your diligence in putting together this report and presenting it to this committee. Thank you.
For those who are watching, we're just doing a little bit of setup of some visual. Be with you momentarily. Okay, please proceed.
Good morning, members of the committee, city and Metrolink staff, and community members. Today we will be presenting Getting Hamilton's LRT on the Right Track, a project aimed at re-envisioning the B-Line LRT from a climate justice lens to deliver recommendations for future rapid transit planning and implementation in Hamilton. Our agenda today includes an introduction to the project team, the context, problem, and goals of the project, and how climate justice and equitable transit-oriented development were applied. This will be followed by our process, our 4 categories of research and findings with tangible recommended actions, and a wrap-up of key considerations or recommendations for Council and for Metrolinx. We are a team of 6 upper year students from McMaster and Redeemer who completed this project in collaboration with the Hamilton Community Benefits Network and CityLab Hamilton. CityLab is an innovation hub that brings together student, academic, and civic leaders to co-create a better Hamilton for all. My name is Isabella, and I will be presenting on behalf of the project team. We have Kiana, Diana, and Hannah in the stands, and I will be presenting with my colleagues Griffin and Simon. Both are long-term residents of Ward 1 and 5, respectively.
Thank you, Isabella. So our project was introduced given the need for greater social benefit surrounding the transit-oriented development associated with a project as large as Hamilton LRT. Transit networks are a fundamental part of any dense, modernly minded city, and the Hamilton LRT is a massive infrastructure commitment. As such, we need to consider its effects extremely carefully, as we will live without them, and we will live with them throughout our lifetimes. Our problem is that while the LRT project is innovative and future-driven, it has inadequately addressed various social considerations and environmental concerns, such as future climate adaptation, environmental damage, housing displacement, and gentrification. Our goal is to present research and tangible recommendations for the city and Metrolinx to consider for future transit developments. These are shaped by equitable transit-oriented development frameworks, or ETOD, as well as our climate justice lens. A key element of our report was to inspect LRT as a critical infrastructure development within the city, one that has a great potential to implement climate change adaptable and resilient infrastructure, as well as an opportunity to promote climate just ideals. Climate justice is a framework that seeks equity for all communities, recognizing that the effects of climate change disproportionately affect marginalized members of our communities, despite their relatively smaller contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. Functionally, climate justice manifests itself in the form of addressing structural inequities based on identity or income bracket, socioeconomic inequalities between municipalities or larger hierarchies, as well as intergenerational equity, which is something that we as students feel very strongly about. Focusing on climate justice also fits within the equity framework, which we propose and is represented here on the right-hand side of my slide. In a 2010 report titled Transit-Oriented Development Guidelines, the City of Hamilton presented that the LRT would deliver economic growth and stronger communities. We feel that these goals of presented transit-oriented development recommendations come from a middle-class urbanist perspective, which does not adequately and should consider the perspectives of low-income community members subject to the worst consequences of transit-oriented development. ETOD, or Equitable Transit-Oriented Development, places a large emphasis on equity and community supports that are most beneficial for all citizens of Hamilton. It considers the social as well as environmental implications of transit-oriented development and how they impact specific vulnerable communities. It allows for those underrepresented groups to mutually feel the benefits of LRT and rapid transit. Fundamentally, ETOD reinforces and aims for affordable, accessible, highly dense, mixed-use urban settings. We feel it is extremely important to address these needs and concerns. Unchecked, they represent the potential loss of city culture and identity, as well as terrible ramifications for large numbers of residents within the city. As part of our process, we collaborated with Carl and the Hamilton Community Benefits Network to determine community needs and where demands for equity are most being desired. Sorry.
Can you mute, please? Excuse me.
No worries. Additionally, we hosted a community engagement event of our own with students from McMaster, Mohawk, and Redeemer. This took place at McMaster University. The goal was to determine what future leaders and residents, those who will be impacted greatly by the effects of climate change, determined as the most important considerations for a city transit network that they would want to call home in future. Finally, we concluded secondary research and an analysis of other municipalities to determine our transit recommendations and actions. We published our findings in a formal 60-page report, as well as in a condensed 4-page community summary report, the latter of which provides the key points of our findings to easily inform others of our recommendations.
Okay, so we structured the ETOD model around 4 major pillars on key themes in our research findings and community engagement efforts to make recommendations that tackle a broad range of the most critical social and environmental impacts of Hamilton's LRT. The first is housing. This identifies affordability as a core need along transit corridors so that no person is excluded from the ability to live near public transit. Next is climate adaptation and resilience, which examines not only the need to plan for the costly impacts of climate change on public transit infrastructure, but also how transit riders themselves will be affected if climate support is not planned for. Connectivity and usage are interconnected elements that ensure transit systems get people where they need to go. The best transit systems in the world offer great connectivity to people, places, and all transport modes, which increase usage rates. And lastly, we have accessibility, which ensures all people have equitable access to transit from the very start to the end of their journey. We will now delve into some of our key findings surrounding these 4 pillars, along with tangible actions for Council and Metrolinx to consider to address each one. Regarding housing, the Beeline LRT runs through some of the most densely populated low-income neighborhoods in Hamilton, as you can see in the map on the slide there. This LRT will result in gentrification and the displacement of these low-income residents to cater to those of higher income brackets, which follows Hamilton's recent new housing construction trends identified in the Hamilton Community Foundation's 2023 Vital Signs report. As new transit developments increase property values and the potential for development opportunities, investments in affordable housing are needed to prevent these consequences, as adequate housing is essential for a community's health and well-being, according to CMHC. We recommend 4 tangible actions that can and should be taken to increase the amount of affordable housing along the Beeline LRT and future rapid transit corridors. The first is implementing an inclusionary zoning policy that requires developers to designate at least 25% of all new developments for affordable housing units to create mixed income neighborhoods. The second is ensuring developers use passive housing design in new residential buildings, which promotes the use of energy-efficient materials that will reduce operating costs in the long run. This keeps units affordable. An example is the Indwell McQueston Lofts in Hamilton. The third is for the city to use land value capture to recover a portion of the increased land value resulting from infrastructure projects like the LRT. Land value capture can be a way to ensure that the public benefits from increases in land value capture rather than allowing private landowners to capture all these gains. Through this, the city can generate funds that can be directed specifically towards affordable housing initiatives. This can also look like potentially Metrolinx donating additional surplus land to the city to use for further affordable housing development. And the fourth is implementing firm affordable housing and tenant support policies for those displaced during construction. These policies can look like partnerships with nonprofit affordable housing providers and must have tangible targets, like adding 50% more housing units than what is currently there. Moving on to climate adaptation and resilience. In analyzing the 2018 Metrolinx Climate Adaptation Strategy, we found that it inadequately addresses adapting to the needs, health, and safety of transit users and communities during extreme weather events. While it does an excellent job of considering climate resilience for physical transit infrastructure with key actions surrounding weather planning and monitoring and accounting for climate adaptation in their budgets, the only key action relating to health and safety is targeted towards transit staff and crew, rather than customers and community members. The same gaps are evident in Metrolinx's 2021 Sustainable Design Standards. As the frequency and intensity of natural hazards, extreme heat events, and worsening air quality grow, Hamiltonians need to be accounted for. Two tangible actions that can and should be taken on this matter include reworking transit design standards to emphasize considerations for community health, safety, and resilience to climate change, and prioritizing climate-adaptable and accessible green and built infrastructure. In practice, these look like utilizing green track beds, as seen in the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, keeping and replanting trees wherever possible along the corridor, and adapting LRT station designs from open-air stops to enclosed climate-controlled shelters, similar to the ones seen in the TTC access hubs in Toronto.
Thank you, Isabella. So now we move on to the next two pillars. For connectivity and usage, when considering Hamilton using a climate justice mindframe, LRT should not be the only mode of transportation looked at. As climate justice emphasizes the interconnectedness of social and equity problems, we realize that other lifestyle improvements related to infrastructure can help promote the benefits that come from LRT. By creating new green spaces and other public areas, residents will be more eager to head to the LRT area to enjoy Hamilton. However, limiting pinch points in the process will make it even easier by creating proper infrastructure around the system. At the community engagement event that we hosted, the biggest concern from attendees was the lack of connectivity to the LRT, mostly for cycling. A lack of protected bike lanes does not provide adequate protection from Hamilton's increasingly busy roads and the fear of not being able to store your bike during on-peak hours, which worries many residents. This is concerning as LRT's main goal is to get people to start living more environmentally friendly, and without giving them the chance to do so, the paradigm shift wanted by LRT organizers loses its emphasis. Therefore, these recommendations outline the need for further bike and walkable infrastructure surrounding the envisioned transit network. For accessibility, since the LRT project will affect everyone living near the Hamilton corridor, it is only fair that it is accessible to everyone, and that should be encouraged through its design and general awareness. As Hamilton's downtown wards have the highest disability rate in Ontario, lower income levels compared to the rest of the city, and people from various backgrounds, it is critical to consider the principles listed on the slide to encourage accessibility and usage. By using a gender-based analysis, framework is provided that can help see the gaps through the strategy to accommodate everyone. GBA Plus can do this by taking into account various factors surrounding age, gender, and income to determine adequate needs for what it is analyzing. This was done last year for the LRT in Edmonton and found that marginalized community members felt more comfortable using it at off-peak hours. Now, you might ask yourself, how will we even further accessible transit on the LRT in practice? We have proposed 3 recommendations based on our research. By incorporating other accessible modes of transportation, like DARTs, and subsidizing low-income individuals and students, the invisible barriers that these individuals experience daily have now been lowered. It is now possible for many to commute to jobs further away. A better well-being for seniors and people with disabilities knowing that assistance can be provided, and students now being able to explore Hamilton with less doubts about how to get to a certain area. This is why it is essential to consider accessibility when deciding which of the 4 models of privatization will be used at the next upcoming subcommittee. Finally, we have a couple overall overreaching key considerations. So to conclude, we urge that the City and Metrolinx place ETOD at the center of planning, designing, and implementing future transit developments, including the Beeline LRT. It considers the equitable and accessibility of transit for all residents and how the transit system can contribute to the city's climate adaptation efforts. Our 4 overreaching recommendations or considerations following this model that encompass all the actionable items we presented today for each of the 4 pillars demonstrate an overall view of all factors that ETOD could affect on Hamilton's re-envisioned transit system. The 4 main takeaways are listed above on this slide. Increasing affordable housing units along rapid transit corridors, implementing climate-adaptable public transit infrastructure to promote transit use and resilience, ensure connectivity between other modes of transportation and public transit systems in Hamilton, and last but not least, ensuring accessibility to all communities' physical needs, income levels, and identities. All in all, implementing equitable transit-oriented development using a climate justice lens will create affordable and inclusive neighborhoods for all. Thank you to City Lab for a great semester, as well as city councilors, staff, and members of the public for allowing us to present today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was awesome. Okay, I'm going to allow for some questions. If you don't mind standing for a little bit more, or I don't know, you have other folks, would they like to join you, or how are you going to field the questions?
Yes, the other members of our group can come down and answer questions if they like to as well.
Put them on the firing line, right? Thank you very much. So, Councillor Nan, were you on the speakers list? No?
I'm just going to test my audio. Do I still sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks?
You sound wonderful. You sounded wonderful before, just a little higher octave.
Awesome. Thank you for my council colleagues who encouraged me to reboot the entire system. I just wanted to say through you, Chair, thank you so much to the team who put together this research project. I think many of these recommendations are excellent and very clear. I honestly don't have any questions to the content of the presentation. My question, Chair, is a procedural one. So I'm happy to come back after colleagues who might have questions on the content have had a chance to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I will recognize Councillor Cassar and then Member Andrus. Councillor Cassar.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for the presentation. Enjoyed reading it and enjoyed taking in the presentation. You would have heard me in the last presentation ask about land value capture, because your presentation kind of intrigued me, and I did some research on that. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on A, other examples that you've seen of land value capture, and then B, what we can potentially do in Hamilton on this topic. Through you, Chair.
Thank you. Whoever is going to answer, if you could just make sure you're in front of the microphone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question through you, Chair. I will not claim to be an expert on this topic. It is something that we looked into because we know governments around the world typically use this method. There are several different ways that land value capture can be used by governments. Land banking is one of them. Taxation is another form of doing that. What may work best in Hamilton is not really something that I know too much about, but we did bring it up as something for city staff to consider in their planning for the LRT. We think it is a very important thing that can ensure affordable housing units are created. So just something to bring to the forefront and bring to the attention of city staff.
Yeah, no, thank you. Fair enough. Definitely some more work to be done there. And I had a second question on the climate adaptation and resilience recommendations. I was wondering if you could just dive a little deeper into your first recommendation, rework trend is design standards to emphasize considerations for community health, safety, and resilience to climate change. The presentation is very high level, and there were some quick comments, but wanted to give the opportunity to elaborate on that if you'd like, please.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. Again, through your chair. So that statement had to do with the sustainable design standards and the climate adaptation from Metrolinx that were developed in 2021 and 2018. So as we mentioned, many of the key actions and things that were written in those reports have to do with resiliency to the climate crisis for specific transit infrastructure rather than the health and safety of community members. There was one key action that targeted specifically for health and safety, but it was for transit crews. In terms of if there was an extreme weather event, how would they be? What would be the actions they would take, and what would happen to the transit system as a whole? So we do think that it is important for specific targets and actions for community members to be implemented into those design standards to address the climate crisis. And that is particularly why one of our recommendations had to do with enclosed climate-controlled bus and LRT shelters, because that is climate planning for the community and considering the transit user journey and how transit users will be impacted by extreme weather events.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Those are all the questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Member Andrus, please.
Yes, thank you. Again, I really want to thank you guys for your hard work this semester and partnering to us. I also want to thank city staff for working along with the Climate Change Office, who was also partnered with City Lab. I want to thank the instructors at City Labs for participating and guiding the students through this journey, and also through counselors previous and current who continue to fund the City Labs program through the partnerships that they've built with the City of Hamilton. A couple of quick questions. In your talking about station hubs, building on the other members through the chair's point, I noticed that there were 16 stops that you mentioned. Did one of you know what those 16 stops cost approximately for delivery?
Yes, through the chair. Those 16 stops cost about $17.4 million. Pre-pandemic prices, yeah.
And those were enclosed climate-controlled stops?
Yes.
Yeah. And the other comment that you made very briefly, I wanted to talk about in terms of that multimodal connectivity, was the concept of bicycles, and something that I guess came out of your engagement sessions. Can you talk a little bit about what that was?
Yes, sure, I can talk about that. Through the chair, so through City Lab, we had to perform a community engagement event. We did that with students at McMaster University, and for the scope of the project, we didn't really have much other time to really talk to any other community members, so we just decided to really focus in on students for that. So when doing the boards and when really looking at that, we saw that a lot of students, and it wasn't just all students, there was a lot of other community members there as well, luckily, is that they were trying to really what they really saw is that LRT was not connected to any other transport systems. And a lot of people in that Westdale, McMaster area and through the overall city like using their bikes to connect to public transport. So if there is not really much connectivity, then it's very hard to access the LRT, and with that comes usage problems and an overall paradigm shift, which I mentioned in the presentation about trying to get people to use more public transit instead of more cars on the road, which really hurts with climate justice and overall traffic. So by having a healthier and safer Hamilton, we feel that adding bike stations, protected bike lanes, will really help affect LRT with usage and just an overall health standpoint in the city.
Thank you very much, and I believe the report also mentioned specifically bike storage lockers and concerns around theft. My last question is not really a question so much as a comment. You talk about land value capture and the need for affordable housing. At the General Issues Committee last week, a staff report came forward around 171 Main Street East, which had designated that property for sale for private use as opposed to the construction of affordable housing on that land, specifically being prime downtown land. So can you really, especially given that your students comment on the gross need for affordable housing, both student and across the housing continuum, and really kind of give us a sense from your own personal experiences how dire that need is?
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, through the community engagement event that we've hosted, as well as other data sources that we've looked at supplied by the HCBN, as well as just ones that we've pursued on our own, housing affordability is consistently basically identified as the top priority of most citizens. This is something that all students are feeling very presently as well. I think on the boards that we did, there was near unanimous decision that everyone identified housing affordability as a key prioritized interest. So in the reference of 171 King Street East, I think I speak on behalf of everything of the community engagement and our findings there that, yeah, that is a dire need for the community.
Thank you. No further questions. And again, I appreciate all of your hard work and thank you for taking brave. I remember the first time I stood in front of this council and I was not nearly as eloquent all those years ago. So thank you again for presenting to us and for taking the time out of your day.
Yeah, thank you. Some of us are still working on it. I'm going to come to Councillor Nan in a minute, but if I could ask Councillor Danko to assume the chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you could expand on the reference to a gender lens. I'm not quite sure I understand why and what you meant. Thank you.
So in Edmonton, a lot of the issues that they were having were around crime, safety, and security. And when they researched more into why that was happening, they found that it was a gender disparity. Mostly women were feeling unsafe, and the people that were causing it. So they looked into solving those issues and seeing what those recommendations from the community members experiencing the issues actually had to say, rather than just putting more lights in or having more seating options, more cameras. So yeah, they found the people who were experiencing the problem and they solved it through it. Yeah.
Thank you. So they communicated with the users and involved them in the problem solving identification? Yes. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I'll assume the chair. Thank you, Councillor Danko. I will look to Councillor Nan, who I believe you had a procedural question, but I'm not sure. Please.
Thank you, through you, Chair. And just I'm mindful when we have presentations that it doesn't necessarily come with direction. So if it's appropriate, I would like to refer this presentation back to staff. There are some items in the recommendations that are outlined that I do believe the municipality is working towards. And I think it would be useful for this committee to see a list of those recommendations that are already in progress versus those that this committee might be able to consider as the presentation intersects with our overarching city priorities around climate action.
Oops. Thank you. So refer back in consideration of, I'm seeing a nod also from the front bench. Councillor, is that a good interpretation, Councillor Nan, if you could affirm, and then I'll recognize Councillor Critch.
Certainly, and I've sent language over to Elsie McIntosh as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Elsie McIntosh, do you have the language? And if you could put it up, and then I'll recognize Councillor Critch. Did you wish to speak to it or second it? I wasn't sure.
Just kind of second it. I think it's a great idea to get a report back from staff on this important report.
Thank you. I don't know if we need to see the language. I think there's an understanding of the direction. So it's been duly moved and seconded. There it is right there, that staff be directed to review the presentation and report back to this committee with what recommendations, what actions the city is already active on, and if there are additional recommendations for this committee to consider. Okay. If we can have a vote on that, please. Vote is up.
Councillor Nan?
Thumbs up. Okay, thank you. That carries 6-0. As the chair, I'm going to take the prerogative. I think it's really important for young residents and citizens to practice this. So if I could ask you to say your name into the mic, because you each haven't had an opportunity, so that you can say your name, you can hear your name, and we can hear your name. And then I thank you very much.
My name's Kiana Craig.
My name is Diana Smano.
My name is Simon Batusik. I am a Ward 5 resident.
My name is Hannah Horlings.
My name is Gervin Kinsey, and perhaps I'm pandering, but I'm a Ward 1 resident.
I mean, I know I introduced the presentation, but I'm Isabella Sipos. Thank you.
And which ward are you in?
I'm living in Ward 1. Now I go to McMaster. So.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all very much for your attention and your time. It's been very helpful, and I hope as you continue your studies and your life that you'll pay attention to and lean into your responsibilities, and with a particular focus on local government, because it is the most rewarding level of government in which to attend to. Thank you. Okay, we can receive that report as amended.
We need to receive the presentation.
Receive the presentation, beg your pardon.
Do we have a mover and seconder?
Oh, moved by Councillor Cassar, seconded by me. Thank you.
Councillor Nan?
Councillor Nan? Got it? Yep, thumbs up. Thank you. That carries 6-0. We're on to consent items. 9.1, Hamilton Light Rail Transit Community Benefits Update. A mover and a seconder to receive this report, and then we can...
Can we go back and receive the report?
Oh. To receive the report. It's moved by Councillor Cassar and seconded by myself. Thank you. Always keeping me on track, Elsie McIntosh. Get that? On track? Da-da. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan. Thumbs up from Councillor Danko. Carries 6-0. Thank you. Now on to consent items. 9.1, as previously mentioned. Mover and a seconder to receive. Councillor Cassar, seconded by Councillor Danko. Any comment on the report? Oh, I'm going, oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to leave it as a notice. Because I'm going to, do I do that now? No. Oh, all right. Just, I have a notice forthcoming, kind of related. Okay. Did we vote on that? No. May we have a vote on that? It's been duly moved and seconded by Councillor Cassar and myself. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan. And myself. Thumbs up. And for Councillor Danko, thumbs up. Okay, that carries 6-0. Any notices of motion from my colleagues? I have a notice, but I just have to work on the wording. Just give me a sec. Yeah, thank you. If I could ask Councillor Danko, do I have to relinquish the chair? Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
We've heard a lot today about baseline measures as, to guide our assessment and review and any opportunity to pivot. So I have to work on the wording, but a notice being that staff be requested to report back on terms of reference for establishing a baseline of measures that would enable the city to track changes over time with respect to economic, environmental, and social metrics. Thank you. Any other notices? Seeing none. 14.1, general information, amendments to the outstanding business list. Mover and seconder to approve those amendments. Moved by Councillor Cassar, seconded by Councillor Kretsch. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan and Councillor Danko. Yep, thumbs up. Oh, yeah. 6-0. Thank you. Any other items for general information or other business? Seeing none. Okay, now we're going into, we have closed session minutes, which we can approve in open session. Moved by Councillor Kassar, seconded by Councillor Danko to approve the minutes of September the 25th, 2023. That vote is up. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan. Thumbs up from Councillor Danko. That carries 6-0. Thank you. I now require a motion to go into closed session for item 15.2, which is Light Rail Transit Strategic Site Selection Update Report, PED 23142A, for wards 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Moved by Councillor Kassar, seconded by Councillor Nan. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan, thumbs up from Councillor Danko.
I had one this afternoon with my coffee. They only brought an apple for lunch. Yes, please.
Carries 6-0. Thank you. Pursuant to Section 9.3, subsections C and K of the city's procedural bylaw 21-021 as amended, and Section 22392, subsections C and K of the Ontario Municipal Act 2001 as amended, as the subject matter pertains to a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land for city or a local board purpose, and a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or behalf of the city or a local board. We need an electronic vote. Did we not do that? We did that. And that was carried. Members of the public are advised that during the closed session portion of the meeting, the live stream will broadcast a closed session in progress screen. The broadcast will resume when the closed session portion of the meeting is complete. We are now moving into closed session. I would ask all members of the public who are here today and delegates and external participants to please exit the WebEx meeting, as well as staff that are not directly related to this item. If you could please exit the chamber or the WebEx. I need to remind members that as per Section 8.7 of our procedural bylaw, the use of personal electronic devices during closed meetings is strictly prohibited. However, the use of city electronic devices during closed session meetings are limited to text communications only, with the city's electronic devices not being used as a telephone recording device or camera. Staff from the Office of the City Clerk are exempted from subsection 8.7C when using electronic devices for record-keeping purposes. Yeah. good to go? So we've just come back and we're now in open session. I need a mover and a seconder to approve the following. A, that the direction provided to staff in closed session respecting report PED 23412A be approved. B, that the entirety of report PED 23412A light rail transit strategic site selection update report remain confidential and not be released as a public document. Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Kassar. The vote is up. Thumbs up from Councillor Nan. Thumbs up from Mayor Horvath. That carries 6-0. Thank you all. May I please have a mover and a seconder to adjourn? Councillor Kassar and Councillor Kretsch. On behalf of all of us, and thank you very much to staff for your work in preparing for today, and to my colleagues for all your good questions and attention to this matter. Thank you. And to clerks, of course. Yeah. Councillor Nan is, everybody's through that. Thank you. We are adjourned. That carries 6-0.